Every time you justify a choice, defend a boundary, or over-explain to someone already committed to misunderstanding you, you commit a quiet catastrophe. You hand them the gavel. You walk yourself to the stand. You place your entire life on trial in a courtroom you never agreed to enter. Niccolo Machiavelli understood a brutal law of human psychology few are willing to say aloud. Power is inversely proportional to the number of words used to defend it. The moment you explain, you have already lost the room. Today, you will learn the architecture of silence and why every sovereign mind in history communicated only in results. Notice what just happened inside your body. A small recognition, a flicker of something that's been waiting. Beneath the surface of your daily life you've always known, those who command genuine respect never seem to explain themselves. They state, they decide, they move. And you, by contrast, have spent years assembling sentences like a defense attorney, trying to construct the perfect arrangement of words that will finally make someone understand your intent. That assembly has cost you. It has cost you more than you know. You were taught that mature people communicate, good people clarify, honest people justify. This is the foundational lie of the anxious over-justifier. The cage Machiavelli watched ordinary people build for centuries. A moral code dressed as virtue, its function purely structural. It keeps you producing words, proof, yourself on demand to anyone who applies pressure. The systems that taught this code, relationships, institutions, early environments, all benefited from your compliance. Because a person who explains is a person who can be measured, tracked, predicted, quietly dismissed. A person who refuses to explain is a variable nobody can solve. That variable is what you are about to become. Ask yourself the forbidden question. The one you were taught was arrogant, cynical, or cold. Why are you the one assembling evidence for your own existence? Why have you accepted the role of defendant, where no crime occurred, no jury was seated, and no judge was appointed? There is no court here except the one built by your own conditioning. You found this moment not by chance. You've carried a quiet exhaustion, the exhaustion of being misread by people who never intended to read you correctly, the exhaustion of standing trial in your relationships, career, family. And beneath that exhaustion, a sharper self has been waiting for permission to stop performing, waiting for the framework that finally explains why silence has always felt like power, even when the world insisted it was rudeness. This is that framework. By the end of this video, you will understand the precise mechanism by which over-explaining transfers your authority to those who haven't earned it. You will understand why Machiavelli treated silence not as the absence of communication, but as its most concentrated form. You will learn the cold, composed architecture of inscrutability, the same architecture used by sovereigns, generals, and quiet operators across every century of recorded history. You will discover the exact moment to refuse an answer and why that single refusal will tilt entire power dynamics in your favor. And the deepest principle, the one that rewires your nervous system so that interrogation no longer triggers your panic response, waits for you at the end. Do not skip ahead. The order matters, because what you're about to integrate is not a communication tip. It is the reclamation of a sovereign mindset trained out of you for someone else's convenience. If these ideas resonate, hit subscribe for more top-tier content. Drop "never explain" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Picture the scene precisely. Someone questions you. Their tone is sharp or wounded or falsely casual, and without a single conscious decision on your part, your mouth opens. Words begin arranging themselves before your awareness has even caught up. You start producing reasons, context, history, mitigating factors. You bring forward evidence. You cite intent. You explain the chain of events that led to your decision. You have just walked into a courtroom that does not exist, taken the witness stand voluntarily, and sworn an oath to a judge who was never appointed by anything other than your own anxious reflex. This is the courtroom trap, and it is the single most devastating drain on the emotional intelligence of intelligent, conscientious people. Because the more aware you are, the more nuanced your inner life, the more sensitive you are to being misread, the harder this trap closes on you. The unaware do not over-explain. They do not have enough internal material to even feel the pull. It is the perceptive, the thoughtful, the ones with rich interior worlds who get caught here. It is you. Here is the mechanism, stated as cleanly as Machiavelli would state it. The instant you begin to explain, you have accepted 3 propositions without your conscious consent. First, you have accepted that the other person possesses the right to demand an account of your behavior. Second, you have accepted that your actions require their approval to be legitimate. Third, you have accepted that their interpretation of your words will be conducted in good faith. All 3 of these propositions are almost always false. And every word you produce, while operating under them, is a word that strengthens their false foundation. Machiavelli observed this with surgical clarity. He noticed that authority is not granted by argument. It is never won by the better constructed sentence. It is granted by posture. The moment you argue your case, you have already conceded that your case is up for debate. The moment you defend your boundary, you have already implied that the boundary is negotiable. The moment you justify your no, you have already transformed your no into a request. The conditioned mind cannot perceive this because the conditioned mind treats explanation as connection. But explanation in the wrong context, with the wrong person, in the wrong dynamic is not connection. It is capitulation, wearing the costume of dialogue. Watch the people in your life who command genuine respect. Study them carefully. They do not preempt criticism with elaborate disclaimers. They do not overproduce themselves. They do not flood difficult moments with words. They state, they decide, they move, and when challenged, they respond with a brevity that feels almost insulting to the anxious mind, because the anxious mind cannot tolerate the existence of an unanswered question. But the sovereign mindset understands something the anxious mind has never been allowed to access. Every unnecessary word is a small surrender of power dynamics. Every justification is a quiet vote that the other person's opinion of you matters more than your own clarity. Every explanation is, at its root, a confession that you do not yet believe you have the right to exist on your own terms. And you have been paying a tax for this. Call it the oversharer's tax. Every time you flood a moment with explanation, you dilute your perceived value. You signal uncertainty, you signal that you need permission, you signal that the floor is open for cross-examination, that the case is still in session, that the verdict has not yet been reached. And the worst part, the part that should make something in you go cold and quiet right now, is that the people who triggered this response in you did not even have to work for it. You handed them the gavel for free. You volunteered. You walked into a courtroom no one was forcing you to enter, and you swore yourself in. That ends now. But before it can end, you have to understand something deeper. You have to understand why words themselves, the very currency you have been spending so freely, have a value that collapses the moment you overproduce them. There is a law that operates beneath every conversation, and it is older than any language you have ever spoken. Words are currency. And like any currency, the more you print, the less each unit is worth. This is the oversharer's tax in its purest economic form. When you speak constantly to defend your boundaries, your decisions, your character, your intent, you are flooding the market with your own voice. and the perceived value collapses in real time, sentence by sentence, until your words mean almost nothing to the people receiving them. Machiavelli understood this with a precision that still unsettles modern readers. He observed that the rulers who endured were not the ones who explained their reasoning to the court. They were the ones whose reasoning remained unreadable. Their decisions arrived as completed structures, not as negotiations. Their authority was not argued, it was assumed. And because it was assumed, no one thought to question it. This is the leverage point that the conditioned mind has never been taught to see. Explanation invites the question, restraint closes it. Consider with cold precision what happens in the nervous system of the person interrogating you when you refuse to flood them with words. They do not get the resolution they were seeking. They do not get the emotional discharge of cornering you. They do not get the satisfaction of measuring your justification against their internal standard and finding it wanting. Instead, they encounter something they were not prepared for. A composed wall, a short answer, a look that does not flinch, a silence that does not apologize for itself. And in that vacuum, in that unfilled space where your justification used to live, something extraordinary occurs. The dynamic inverts. They begin to wonder what you know that they do not. They begin to wonder whether they have misread the situation entirely. They begin, quietly, beneath their own awareness, to recalibrate their assumption that you owe them anything at all. This is power dynamics at its most distilled. Not aggression, not cleverness, restraint, the deliberate refusal to participate in your own trial. And here is the part that the conditioned mind resists most fiercely. You have been told repeatedly by people who benefited from your explanations that withholding context is cold, immature, even passive-aggressive. That conditioning is not your conscience speaking. It is not your morality. It is residue. It is the residue of every environment that profited from your compliance, every relationship that depended on your habit of producing yourself on demand, every system that taught you that good people are transparent to the point of being defenseless. Carl Jung theorized that the parts of us we exile do not disappear. They wait. They wait in the unlit corridors of the psyche, perfectly preserved, perfectly capable, perfectly available, until the day we finally turn around and acknowledge them. The unapologetic self, the part of you that knows it does not need to perform for approval, has been waiting beneath layers of conditioning your entire adult life. It has watched you over-explain in meetings. It has watched you justify your boundaries to family members who never respected them. It has watched you draft and redraft text messages to people who twisted your words anyway. And it has been waiting, patiently, for the moment you stop calling it cold and start calling it home. This is the shadow integration moment that the self-help literature rarely names with this kind of precision. You do not become sovereign by adding new behaviors on top of the old conditioning. You become sovereign by reclaiming the parts of yourself that were trained out of you for someone else's convenience. Your capacity to be misunderstood without collapsing. Your capacity to disappoint without apologizing. Your capacity to leave a question hanging in the air and feel nothing but a quiet, clean stillness where the old panic used to live. That capacity is not new. It is original. It was yours before anyone taught you that explanation was the price of being loved. But understanding this is not enough. Recognition alone will not change your reflexes, because the next time someone applies pressure, the old patterns will surge up faster than your awareness can intercept them, which means you need to understand the deeper mechanism beneath the reflex itself, the exact reason your body learned to over-explain in the first place, and the precise sequence that finally dismantles it. Every habit of over-explanation has a root, and the root is almost never logical. It is biographical. Somewhere in your history, explanation was survival. Maybe a parent who interpreted silence as defiance and demanded a verbal account of every feeling. Maybe a teacher who treated brevity as insolence and rewarded only the students who could perform elaborate articulation on command. Maybe an early relationship in which your inner life was constantly demanded as proof of loyalty, in which any moment of withholding was treated as betrayal. You learned very early and very deeply that producing words was the price of safety, that if you could just explain well enough, articulately enough, completely enough, you could finally be understood, and the threat would pass, and the love would return. This is the anxious confession, and it is not a communication style. It is a survival reflex masquerading as a personality trait. Once you see it clearly with this exact framing, you cannot unsee it. The racing heart when someone questions your decision, the compulsive mental rehearsal of what you should have said, the exhausting afterloop of conversations in which you keep refining your explanation hours, sometimes days, after the moment has already passed. None of that is communication. None of that is you connecting with another human being. That is your nervous system still trying to negotiate with a threat that ended years ago, sometimes decades ago, with people who are no longer even in the room. Machiavelli observed in his characteristically cold language that the people most easily handled are the ones most desperate to be understood. He framed this not as a moral flaw, but as a tactical vulnerability, because the person who needs to be understood will always speak first, speak longer, and reveal more. They will hand over their reasoning, their fears, their motivations, their childhood wounds, all in the desperate hope that comprehension will finally arrive and the relentless inner pressure will finally release. But comprehension does not arrive on schedule. What arrives instead, every single time, is information asymmetry. They now know you. You do not know them. They have your reasoning. You do not have theirs. And in any system of power dynamics, the one who holds more information controls more terrain. This is why information sovereignty is not optional for the strategic mind. It is foundational. Your inner reasoning, your private motivations, your emotional process, your unresolved fears, your strategic calculations, these are not public utilities. They are not owed to co-workers, family members, partners, neighbors, or strangers who decide to apply social pressure. They are the architecture of your inner life. They are the load-bearing walls of your sovereignty. And the moment you start handing them out freely to anyone who applies the right pressure in the right tone, you have stopped being a sovereign and started being a resource. A resource that other people draw from until you are empty and then discard when there is nothing left to extract. Notice how the conditioned voice inside you wants to protest right now. It wants to say that this sounds cold, that relationships require openness. That communication is the foundation of intimacy. And all of that is true in the right context with the right people on terms you have consciously chosen. But that is the entire key. Consciously chosen. The over-explainer does not choose. The over-explainer reacts. The over-explainer pours out information as a reflex to anyone who applies the correct pressure, regardless of whether that person has earned a single drop of access. The shift you are being offered today is not a shift toward coldness. It is a shift from reaction to selection, from compulsion to sovereignty, from producing yourself on demand to deciding with full awareness who gets access to which layer of your inner architecture and on what terms. This is emotional intelligence operating at its highest, most rarely taught register. Most people think emotional intelligence means being more open, more expressive, more verbally connected. But the real emotional intelligence, the kind that the strategic operators across history have always quietly embodied, is the capacity to discern precisely how much of your inner world a given situation actually deserves. To meter your disclosure with the same care a banker meters credit. To recognize that intimacy is not the indiscriminate flooding of information, Intimacy is the deliberate, mutual, earned exchange of access between two sovereign interiors. And anything else, anything you produce on demand under social pressure, is not intimacy. It is leakage. And once you stop the leakage, once you close the valve, once you reclaim the architecture of your own interior, something else becomes possible. Something most people never access in an entire lifetime. The clean refusal. Here is the principle that separates the composed from the conditioned, the sovereign from the supplicant. The sovereign mind has learned to say no without offering a because. The conditioned mind cannot. The conditioned mind believes at a level so deep it feels like physics rather than habit that refusal must be earned, that boundaries must be negotiated, that every no is the opening sentence of a lengthy defense brief, so it produces reasons. It manufactures conflicts. It invents prior commitments. It fabricates illnesses. It performs an elaborate theater of justification, all to soften a single syllable that needed no softening at all to dress up a decision that required no costume to be valid. Stop and watch what happens in your own body when you imagine simply saying no. No qualifier, no apology, no context, no softening preamble, just the word, delivered with composed neutrality, followed by nothing. For most people, the sensation that arises is almost unbearable. A surge of heat, a scramble for additional words, an immediate compulsion to fill the silence, to repair the imagined damage, to soothe the imagined hurt. That sensation is not your conscience operating. That sensation is conditioning operating. It is the alarm system installed by every environment that punished you for having limits, that rewarded you for being available, that taught you that the highest virtue was endless accommodation of other people's preferences. Machiavelli's strategic thinking on this is surgically precise. He observed that the moment you justify a refusal, you have transformed it from a decision into a request. A no with a because is a no awaiting approval. A no with a because invites negotiation, counter-argument, emotional escalation, alternative proposals, guilt deployment, and the slow erosion of your original position through accumulated rhetorical pressure. But a no without a because is closed architecture. There is no door to push against. There is no handle to grip. The conversation simply has nowhere to go because you have not offered any surface for it to continue on. This is where boundaries stop being a therapy concept passed around in workshops and become a practical instrument of inner sovereignty. Real boundaries are not announcements. They are not lengthy declarations of what you will and will not tolerate. Real boundaries are not even strictly speaking communicated. Real boundaries are short, complete, structural, and unaccompanied. They do not seek validation. They do not anticipate objection. They simply exist, the way a wall exists, without explaining itself to those who approach it, without apologizing to those who would prefer it weren't there, without softening its edges to make itself more palatable to those it inconveniences. And here is what almost no one prepares you for. When you begin to operate this way, some of the people around you will become uncomfortable. Some will become irritated. Some will accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of being difficult, of acting like you think you are better than everyone else. This reaction is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. This reaction is the precise, unambiguous signal that you are doing it correctly, because the people who benefited most from your habit of over-explaining will be the first to notice the loss of access. Their discomfort is not a moral verdict on your behavior. It is data. It is high-quality, unmistakable data about which relationships in your life were built on your sovereignty and which were built on your compliance. Allow that data to inform you. Do not flinch from it. The relationships that survive your sovereignty are the only ones that were ever real. But there remains one more layer to this architecture. the deepest one, the one that determines whether everything you have just learned remains a set of techniques you perform on calm days, or becomes a state you simply inhabit permanently, without effort, without strain, without the need to remember. Technique fails under pressure. Posture does not. And what separates the people who can apply these principles only on quiet afternoons from the people who embody them in the middle of an interrogation is not skill, it is not memory, it is not willpower, it is internal architecture. The sovereign posture is not something you do, it is something you become, and the foundation of it, the bedrock under everything else, is a single quiet conviction that the conditioned mind has never been allowed to access. You do not require comprehension to be legitimate. Sit inside that sentence for a moment, because the conditioned part of you will want to flinch away from it almost immediately. You do not require comprehension to be legitimate. Your decisions do not become valid only when others approve of them. Your boundaries do not become real only when others accept them. Your inner life does not become coherent only when others understand it. Your refusal does not become acceptable only when others agree it was warranted. The legitimacy was never out there. It was never in their nodding, their agreement, their finally getting it, their reluctant acknowledgement that yes, you had a point. The legitimacy was always inside you, sealed in the original architecture of who you are. And the only reason you have spent so much of your life chasing external comprehension is that someone, somewhere very early, taught you that the source was located elsewhere. That teaching was a lie, a useful lie for them, a devastating lie for you, and you are allowed right now in this exact moment to set it down. This is the Jungian integration of the unapologetic self in its complete form, not the loud, performative version that the internet sells as confidence, the quiet version, the version that does not announce itself, the version that can be questioned, doubted, criticized, misread, gossiped about, mischaracterized, and simply does not metabolize any of it as a threat to its core. This is what people are actually sensing when they describe someone as having presence. They are not sensing charisma. Charisma can be faked. They are sensing the absence of a particular hunger. The hunger to be understood, the hunger to be approved, the hunger to explain, the hunger to close the gap between their interior and your perception of it. The sovereign has no such hunger, and the absence of that hunger is what every other nervous system in the room registers, even when no one can name what they are registering. Machiavelli's deepest, most underquoted observation on power dynamics was never about manipulation. It was about gravity. He noticed, across decades of watching courts and republics rise and fall, that authority accumulates around those who do not chase it, and dissipates from those who do. The over-explainer chases. The over-explainer is constantly extending themselves outward, constantly trying to close the perception gap, constantly trying to install their version of reality in the other person's mind through sheer rhetorical effort. The sovereign does not chase. The sovereign holds. And in that holding, the perception gap becomes the other person's problem to solve, not yours. They can come closer to your reality, or they can remain at a distance. Either is acceptable, neither requires your further effort. This is gravity. This is what authority actually looks like before it is dressed up in costumes. This is why the strategic mind communicates in results, not in reasoning. Results are unarguable. Reasoning is infinitely arguable. You can explain your decision for an hour and still be misread by someone who has decided in advance to misread you. You can deliver a clean result, a completed project, a kept word, a held line, and be understood instantly, even by people who actively dislike you. This is the leverage point that the conditioned mind has never been shown. Stop trying to be understood through your words. Be understood through your patterns, through your consistency, through what you build, what you refuse, what you walk away from, what you return to, what you protect, what you release. Let your life become the explanation, and let your mouth remain still. Implement this in practice through 3 precise recalibrations that begin tomorrow morning. First, when questioned about a decision you have made, respond with 1 sentence and then stop. Not 2 sentences, not 3. 1. And then let the silence do its work. Most people cannot tolerate the silence and will fill it themselves, often revealing more than they intended, often shifting their own position without any pressure from you. The silence is not empty. The silence is active. The silence is the most strategic instrument in your possession. Second, when asked to justify a no, repeat the no without elaborating. If pressed again, repeat it again, in the same tone, with the same brevity, without any escalation in your voice. The repetition without escalation signals that the matter is closed at the level of architecture, not at the level of argument. There is nothing to win because nothing was ever in dispute. Third, when you notice the old reflex rising, the heat behind the eyes, the scramble in the chest, the compulsion to produce words, pause for 1 full breath before speaking. That single breath is the entire distance between conditioning and sovereignty. Inside that breath, you have a choice. Outside that breath, you do not. Train the breath. The breath trains everything else. When you begin to live this way, you will notice the room tilt. People will lean toward you slightly when you speak, because you speak less. Your words will carry a weight they have never carried before, precisely because you have stopped flooding the market with them. The interrogators in your life, the ones who used to extract endless explanations from you with practiced ease, will begin to lose interest because there is no longer any leverage to be gained by pressing on you. The drain stops. The trial ends. And the relationships that remain, the ones that did not depend on your compliance, will deepen in ways the old version of you could not have accessed, because real intimacy can only exist between sovereigns. Anything else, no matter how warm it felt, was always extraction wearing the costume of closeness. You have become, in the most precise sense of the word, inscrutable, not cold, not distant, inscrutable. A variable they cannot solve, a presence they cannot decode through pressure alone. And that inscrutability is not a performance you are putting on. It is not a mask. It is the natural posture of a mind that has finally stopped placing itself on trial. It is the original face beneath the conditioning. The one Jung said was always waiting in the shadow. The one Machiavelli watched the great sovereigns wear without effort. That face has always been yours. You are not building it. You are uncovering it. Everything you have been carrying, the exhaustion of being misread, the loops of conversations you keep replaying at 3 in the morning, the constant low-grade tension of feeling like you are always on the witness stand, the slow erosion of your energy from explaining yourself to people who never planned to understand you in the first place. All of it traces back to one foundational habit. The habit of believing that your legitimacy lived in someone else's comprehension. It never did. It lives in you, and it always has. Machiavelli pointed to it. Jung pointed to it. Every strategist, every sovereign, every composed operator across recorded history has lived from it. You are not learning something new today. You are reclaiming something that was trained out of you for someone else's benefit, and you are taking it back with both hands. So from this moment forward, treat your words as currency, your reasoning as private architecture, your decisions as completed structures that require no defense. Let people misunderstand you. Let them invent stories about your motivations. Let them sit with their unanswered questions and slowly discover that you are no longer in the courtroom. You are not their resource. You are not their defendant. You are not the on-demand producer of explanations for anyone who decides to apply pressure in the right tone at the right moment. You are the quiet authority at the center of your own life. And that authority does not testify. It does not need to. The verdict was never theirs to deliver. The trial was never real. If this reached the part of you that has been waiting for years for permission, leave one word in the comments below. Sovereign. That single word is your declaration that the trial is over, that the gavel has been returned to its rightful hand, and that from this moment forward, your silence will do the work your explanations used to do, and it will do it better than your explanations ever could. And if you are ready to keep building this internal architecture, the sovereign mindset, the strategic thinking, the inner sovereignty that the conditioned world will never teach you, because the conditioned world depends on your compliance, subscribe. This is the only place where the deep psychology of self-mastery, Machiavellian strategy, and shadow integration is explored without the soft language that strips it of its power. The work continues here, and every layer that follows this one is sharper, quieter, more precise than the last. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.